At this point, the city of Detroit owes money to more than 100,000 creditors. Detroit is facing $20 billion in debt and unfunded liabilities. That breaks down, by the way, to more than $25,000 per resident. Back in 1960, the city of Detroit actually had the highest per capita income in the entire nation. By the way, these facts are from Zero Hedge. They're unbelievable. In 1950, there were 296,000 manufacturing jobs in Detroit. Today there are less than 27,000. Between December 2000 and December...
Not even 10% of the jobs.
December 2000 and December 2010, 48% of the manufacturing jobs in the state of Michigan were lost. There are tons of houses for sale now in Detroit for $500 or less. At this point, there are approximately 78,000 abandoned homes in the city of Detroit. About one-third of Detroit's 140 square miles is vacant. One-third. An astounding 47% of the residents of the city of Detroit are functionally illiterate. Less than half of the residents in Detroit are over the age of 16, and they are working at this point. Less than half. If you can believe it, 60% of all children in the city of Detroit are living in poverty. What I find unbelievable about that stat is that it's only 60%. Detroit was once the fourth largest city in the United States, but over the past 60 years, the population of Detroit has fallen by 63%.
1.8 million to 700,000.
The city of Detroit is now heavily dependent on tax revenue that it pulls from the casinos in the city. Detroit is bringing in $11 million a month in tax revenue from the casinos alone. There are 70 Superfund hazardous waste sites in Detroit. 40% of the street lights in Detroit do not work anymore. Only a third of the ambulances are running. Some ambulances in the city of Detroit have been used for so long they have more than 250,000 miles on them. 2/3 of the parks in the city of Detroit have been permanently closed down since 2008. 2/3 of the parks. The size of the police force in Detroit has been cut by 40%. When you call the police now in Detroit, it takes them an average of 58 minutes to respond.
National average is 11.
Due to budget cutbacks, most police stations in Detroit are now closed to the public 16 hours per day. Violent crime rate in Detroit is 5 times higher than the national average. The murder rate in Detroit is 11 times higher than it is in New York City. Today, police solve less than 10% of the crimes perpetrated in Detroit. Crime has gotten so bad in Detroit that even police are telling people to, quote, enter Detroit at your own risk, end quote. Now, here's the thing about Detroit that you have to understand. Detroit just got there first. Other cities are going to fall. Philadelphia is on this trajectory. Other cities are going to fall. And eventually, the nation will fall in exactly the same way. Why? Because we are doing exactly the same thing. What got Detroit into this trouble? Unfunded liabilities. Well, what are unfunded liabilities? Healthcare.
Pensions.
Social Security, pensions, government that you cannot afford, and a corrupt administration, a corrupt government that was in bed with either the labor unions or the businesses, or at times the businesses and the labor unions. And in the end, it is the little people that lose. And that is exactly what has happened in Detroit, and that is exactly what is happening now to our once great nation. And when I say once great nation, I mean once great nation not because it's no longer a great nation because of this president. The last president did a lot of damage, and the president before that did a lot of damage. There's been a lot of damage going on for quite some time. George H.W. Bush was doing damage as well.
It's not all the president, and this, particularly with this situation, too. I mean, it's not just these guys. I mean, these local situations. I mean, you look at these, this has been decades and decades of the exact same leadership that has led these cities in this situation.
The city of Detroit,
yes.
The city of Detroit and the city of Philadelphia and the city of Washington, D.C. It's progressive policies that are destroying our cities. It's progressives that are destroying. It's not a problem with the Democrats. Well, the Democrats are over, but it's not a problem with the Democrats or the Republicans per se. It is the progressives in both parties, and they are headed towards a one-party system. And if you don't believe that, then you have to ask yourself, why is it I vote every time, and every time it seems like I get the same policies? Because they're progressive policies.
Because you do. That's why.
Yeah.
Because it's true.
You're voting for one party. And that's the difference. And it may be too late for us to break out and be able to see it, because we're now no longer even seeing parties. Now we're being identified by race. Now you are either for the whites or against the whites. I mean, it is one of the most racist things. I mean, you want to talk about going back to Jim Crow? We're there, gang. We're there. We're headed on that exact path, except in the reverse. And unless you are for, and this is what's so sad, this president had such an opportunity. He had a historic opportunity. Race relations were getting much better in this country and had been for a long, long time. They're not perfect. They never will be perfect. But when we can stop seeing each other as colors and start seeing each other as character and principles and values and merit, when we can start seeing each other for what we ourselves create in our own lives, you can't tell me that the people in Detroit have it any harder than Booker T. Washington had it growing up. You can't tell me that. You can't tell me that the people in Detroit have it any harder than, what's the guy's name? Gardner from Pursuit of Happiness.
Chris Gardner.
Chris Gardner. Yeah. Can't tell me that anybody's had it any harder than he had it. It's what you do with your life that makes the difference.
And progressivism, I mean, this is what it does to cities. And you're right, either party. But, I mean, especially at the city level, it's been almost exclusively Democrat.
Yeah, all of these cities that are failing, all of these cities have been ruled almost exclusively, some of them exclusively since like 1913. Yeah. But many of them exclusively since like the 1960s.
Yeah, it's in the area of Definitely. About 90% of the worst poverty cities in America. And progressivism does this, and it means that, as is the case in Detroit, anyone with the means to leave does. Yeah. An acquaintance of mine is one of these people who's like, oh, well, you know what, I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay because this is my city, and I'm going to stay, and I know it's getting bad, but I refuse to white flight out of this city. I'm going to stay. Had someone break into their house recently.
Is this our friend who works for us?
No, it's a friend. No, it's a friend of someone who works for us. But I don't know if anyone's too far separated from these situations anymore. But broke into the house. So the male is downstairs wrestling with this person who's broken into the house. Female is up, the wife with the child upstairs calling 911. They're down there, they're wrestling, they're yelling at each other. Not huge physical altercations, but screaming at each other in the home where this guy does not belong. Calls 911. The police tell him tell her, if the situation escalates, call us back.
Oh my gosh.
There's a person in my freaking house right now.
Wow.
If the situation escalates.
Are they leaving?
Right now, I don't know. I don't know.
If that doesn't,
how does it not make you leave?
If that doesn't make you leave, look, there's time to fish and there's time to cut bait. And I am not one to, believe me, because on vacation I had a fishing experience that we won't go into. I'm not one to use a fishing analogy here, but there is time to fish or cut bait. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, it is time to cut bait. It's time to cut bait. If you're living in Detroit and you're in that situation, it's time to get out. I can't have sympathy for you. If somebody is breaking into your house and the police tell you that, are you allowed to even have a gun in Detroit? Are you allowed to have a gun and discharge it in your own home in Detroit? I'll bet you the answer is no.
Sure, they have very tough gun laws.
See ya. Mm-hmm. Bye-bye. If the police can't come, see, this is where the Second Amendment comes. And this is, quite honestly, why they are trying to disarm you. Because then you need the federal government. You have to have the federal government.